Morning and welcome to our latest in a series of webinars. We're today going to be talking about the next level digital experiences, what that means and how you can begin to apply that to your own businesses. So give you a bit more about Daydot. We're really what we call a DXO, which is digital experience optimization agency. So we're all about discovering opportunity, understanding your customers, and creating digital experiences that help you unleash growth, sustainable growth, ideally. When we talk about DXO, recurring revenue, what we really mean by that is the relationship that you have with your customers and really understanding customers better, understanding what the kind of the levers that are going to unlock sustainable growth and increase customer lifetime value for every customer that you have. As you can see, the traditional relationship, you either have a transactional relationship where it's just purely acquisition or e-commerce, but what we really like to do is help clients to understand how to keep customers coming back again and again and increase the value of those customers over time. We do a lot of different kind of services, but they can be loosely summed up as more sort of customer research, which Nick's going to talk to you about. More consultancy, so that's really helping your business to grow, and what are the models, frameworks, and strategies that you need to really start to implement and make the most out of DXO, and end-to-end experimentation, which Alex is going to talk to you a little bit more about during today's session. We're going to do a quick poll, which hopefully should be popping up on your screen quite shortly. Just really trying to get under the skin a little bit of what are the challenges that you're facing this year. What are your core objectives? So whether that center around digital experience optimization. So that could be how to get more budget. So optimization is often seen as a cost. Identifying customer behaviors which lead to successful retention. Getting the right optimization and experimentation frameworks. It could be tech stack, could be evolving a company culture, or even improving engagement and retention. So, am I allowed to vote? No. Okay, perfect. So what we'll do is we'll use that, and I'll give you guys the results. It should be quite interesting. We'll look at the results when we finish today. So our speakers today, we've got Nick, who's our research manager. So he's going to be talking about discovery and how to really start to identify customer behaviors and patterns, which are going to help to create actionable insights around which you can then start to change your DXO. Alex Topless, he's one of our optimization managers. He's going to be talking about what you do with those insights and that research to really start to make an impact on your customer lifetime value. And finally, we've got Liz from the RSPB, who's going to be talking alongside me on how to create a compelling business case for optimization and to gain investment to look to grow that program. So first of all, we're going to kick off with Nick, who is going to be talking about discovery and what that means for us and what that means for our clients.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the cornucopia of insights that underpins discovery. We're in for an exciting ride. My slide, there we go. No, I've gone backwards. That doesn't help. This is what I'm going to be talking to you over the next few minutes. And it's worth saying just at the outset that there's always a context to business questions. And you may well have noticed there's a couple of things going on at the moment. So a lot of the current business context is driven by the pandemic, and also there's elements of Brexit to it. And the priorities for organisations, for some organisations, it's just clearly a question of survival until we get to the end of the tunnel. But then for others, it's about being positioned well for when things open up again. For customers, they really don't want organisations to be making their lives any harder at the moment, and then making sure that they have their products and services are actually available and available at the right price. So the point of this is just as you go through thinking about customer research, think about this context, because these can make a difference as to the sorts of questions that you're going to ask people, and it also changes the nature of the relationship between organizations and customers. Some of the things, these are the sorts of things that we'll come in and ask about if we do business with you, but it's also the sort of thing that each organization is going to, from time to time, just want to do themselves. There's no magic here, it's basic stuff, but it's surprising how often these things can just drift out of alignment. And so the proposition, are you really clear yourselves as to what differentiates you, why customers should buy from you, and is that clear to your customers? Is it also clear to all of the people in your organization? And who are your competitors? So for most businesses, most of the time, it's going to be fairly obvious. But in disruptive digital times, sometimes it can be hard to spot the competitor that's coming up on the rails. And then for metrics, are you clear about what you're measuring and why you're actually measuring what you're measuring? Quite often I've found organizations will be measuring a load of things and reporting on them and taking time doing that they actually don't use, whilst at the same time they're missing opportunities to measure other dimensions that would be of value. And strategies, is there a clear strategy? Again, does everybody in the organization understand what the strategy is? These are not woolly statements of wish, but very specific things that you're going to do. And then finally, you take all of that and consider how digital fits within the overall context. There'll be some organizations that are offline and online, and others that are just digital pure plays, as the jargon has it. And so one thing that we did for Shelter, just to give one small example here, in terms of helping to identify their proposition, we did some remote usability testing and better understood what it was that their donors were looking for. And they wanted to know how the money was spent. So we made that clearer and also added some more emotive messaging to go with the different levels of donation, resulting in that 6% uplift. So when you're recording data, that shows you what people are doing. Those are the digital footprints that you can track, like archaeologists. And one thing, particularly for smaller organizations, is that sometimes you may not have enough volume of traffic on your website to be able to do great A/B testing and to be able to measure your end goals, such as total volume of sales or number of donations. And so sometimes focusing on some of those micro actions and micro goals can also be of particular value. And that gives you a wider range of measures that you can put into your tests that Alex will be talking about. The data shows, as it says here, what your customers do, but not why they're doing it. And so to understand why people are doing things, you effectively need to talk to them, whether that talking is in person or a survey. You need to be asking people, why did you do that? And it's a combination of data and qualitative insights that gives you the real bang for your buck in terms of understanding what's going on and why it's going on. And so for 118 Money, we could, excuse me, we could measure the drop-off on their application form. We knew that some people were dropping off, but we didn't know why. So by talking to those customers, by doing some remote usability testing, we found out actually that they were just confused by some of the questions on the form. Questions like, what is your net income? Or have you got any further investment sources? So just by getting that insight and rewording, we increased the incremental loan applications. This is just a kind of a paraphrased example of a number of posts that I've seen in various ways on LinkedIn over time, generally posted by fairly senior managers saying, oh, I went to a session today and spoke to some customers and it's absolutely fantastic and everybody ought to do this, and I'm going to go and make some changes and get everybody else to talk to customers. And I'm just slightly scratching my head thinking, well, you know, you really need to understand that talking to customers is something that everybody should be doing. It doesn't have to lay with the research team all the time. And so there are a number of dimensions. These are some of the things that you're going to want to know about customers, donors, clients, whatever you call the people who relate to your organization. It's not a complete comprehensive list, but these are some of the things that will help you to tailor your products and services and communicate better to your customers. And it's always worth developing some personas, which are descriptions of different customer types or different customer segments and relate to marketing archetypes. And by developing these personas, you get a consistent view of who customers are. And once again, I'll come back to sharing them across the organization. Otherwise, you get pockets of understanding and different parts of the organization will focus on different customers. By doing this, you get consistency across communications and make sure that your products and services are relevant to those customers and you know who you're targeting. So here's an example of something that we did for Kingsford Charcoal. They sell charcoal, and typically the barbecue season would finish in the summer. And unsurprisingly, they were looking for ways of extending that season. So once again, we did research, talking to customers, surveys, social listening, interviews, and identified a new female persona of Diane, and came up with a campaign and some messages that really spoke to her core drivers. It's not just a question of we've got really excellent charcoal that burns at a certain temperature and doesn't create dust, but Diane wanted the food to taste good and for the whole family. And a range of material was produced off the back of this, banners and content and videos. And I'm now going to do the big reveal as to what impact it had on their sales. And I have to say, I think 263% year-on-year increase in sales, I hope you would agree, is not too shabby. Bear in mind that relationships do change over time. And when you think about friends and family, and relationships can shift over time, but because they're friends and family, you're close to it. You know, by and large, what's going on day to day. If you're at a distance from your customers, then again, it's easy for things to get out of alignment, for things to drift. So you need to maintain some sort of program so you're still hearing from your customers. And that last point about reviewing feedback from phone and email contacts, I think is something that's often hugely neglected. You may get your research team doing surveys and interviews, but customers are talking to your contact centers and indeed to your sales force all the time. And many missed opportunities there, I feel. So an example of some work that we did for the Wall Street Journal, they wanted to embed some links within their articles that their readers could click on to get more contextual information. And we ran a survey about this and also did some remote interviews, which we recorded. And on the left-hand side is just an example of a table that combines results from interviews and surveys to give a broader picture of what people thought about this. And on the right-hand side is an example from the report that is a screenshot of the video. but it meant that when we played this back to our Wall Street Journal clients, we could play these video snippets, and that's an extremely powerful way of communicating the key points, where it's not just the research guy or girl who's talking and presenting numbers, but stakeholders can see it for themselves, hear it from the lips of the customer. And this is some ongoing work that we're currently doing for the RSPB, and Liz from the RSPB will be talking to you in a few minutes. And what we've done here is we've taken, so Mech Labs is a research consultancy, and they've come up with this useful conversion heuristic. It's not an algebraic equation, it's not a strict formula, it's kind of a rule of thumb to think about the things that impact conversions. And we're doing some work to look at various sources, various places where RSPB customers are talking about the organization and the products, and collating that all together under these various headings. And that will end up giving us the language with the RSPB customers using, that we can reflect back to them on the RSPB website, speaking to people in their own language. So after you've done all of that, you really should know customers like the back of your hand, although I have to keep glancing at mine to remind myself what it looks like. But without having those sorts of customer and audience insights, knowing what people are doing and why they're doing it, then you're really flying blind. And you need those insights to generate your hypotheses for your A/B tests, which Alex will now talk to you about.
Thank you, Nick. Let me just share my screen with everyone. Yeah, so as Nick just mentioned, I'm going to now take you through what you do with all that research and how you turn it into an experimentation roadmap that you can actually start testing with. So you now are probably at this stage surrounded by a whole load of research, a number of Google Sheets, Excel sheets, Word documents detailing your user attitudes, their behaviors, and you might be thinking, what do I do now? Where do I start? How can I actually turn this into a test that I can put onto my website? So when you get to this stage, I like to follow a three-step process. So the first phase is really to condense all that research into something that is a bit more actionable and something that you can use in an ideation session. That's phase two. An ideation session is an opportunity to bring people from around your business together to ideate on the research and think of solutions to the problems that you've identified. And then phase three is prioritization, ranking all of those ideas and turning them into tests. So first step is, okay, so I've got all this research. How do I make it digestible for an ideation session? How do I make it digestible so I can share this with stakeholders around the business? So what we do in this scenario is we really turn it into three separate areas. So you would have done your research and your user personas. So you've got an understanding of your typical user behaviors and their attitudes. So some examples, very top level of this might be, these are some previous examples that we have. 26% of your users state that the products on your website are too expensive. But then at the same time, 50% of those users want to know more about how their money would be used on conservation or during their donations. So that's what your research is telling you. So then really you need to turn that into a problem statement. So that statement essentially outlines the challenge that you're trying to solve. It focuses on the user and their needs, and you have to frame it as, okay, well, how can I help these users? So a problem statement based off that research would look something like, users are price conscious, but are willing to support conservation efforts. So that's your problem that you can frame and you can present to your stakeholders. But then you might be thinking, okay, that's great, but then how do I use that in an ideation session? Well, that's where how might we's come in. The how might we's essentially turn that problem statement into something that's actionable. So an example there would be, how might we justify product costs in order to maintain purchase momentum? So there, what you've got is your research, your problem statement, which outlines the problem of that research, and then the how might we is something that's a bit more actionable. You can actually start to think about tests off the back of. So you might be thinking, well, I can do all of that myself. Why do I need to do an ideation session now? Well, really, an ideation session is an opportunity for you to bring multiple stakeholders together to think creatively and develop solutions to the problems you've identified. Really, the idea is to come up with as many ideas as possible for A/B testing. Doing that by yourself is quite difficult. As we all know, coming up with ideas, bouncing off other people is much easier. And if you're trying to create an experimentation culture, by including stakeholders from the product team, design team, marketing, developers, customer service, you're really building that culture within the business. And also you're just bringing people together that have different skill sets, and you'll get much better ideas out of your session. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, okay, so I've got this research. I know that I need to do an ideation session. How do I do it? So really, ideation sessions, I've sort of detailed some top level guidelines of how you can run one. The first is split your groups into problem statements. So you might, once you've condensed all your research and you've themed it, you might have 5 or 6 problem statements. So split that into your groups. Each group can tackle 1 or 2 problem statements. Then you can use the how might we's to tackle that problem. So it's at this point, they'll go away and they'll start to sketch a load of ideas just as quickly as possible based off that how might we, trying to tackle that problem and think of a solution. You'll come back together and you'll present all of these ideas to the whole group, and you'll probably start to realize that a lot of groups have similar ideas or there are similar themes emerging. So what you want to do is you want to start theming and refining all these ideas. So this is an example from Google Jamboard of an ideation session I ran a few weeks ago, which is essentially, you can start to see that we can theme all these ideas that are coming out under personalization or incentivization, etc. And you'll probably end up at the end of your session with about 100 different ideas, which then you might think, great, so I had all this research, I distilled that down, and now I've got 100 different ideas, which is really good, but where do I start with all these 100 ideas? What do I test first? So the key thing really here is you've got all your tests. Don't just let your boss decide what you should test. You really need to honor your users' needs and align with your business goals. So there are a number of ways you can do that. And the best way is to use a prioritization framework to help you rank all of your ideas. There's quite a few out there in the optimization space, but these are some of the most common, which you may have heard of. They all have their pros and cons. We tend to use PXL, and we customize this framework based on the clients that we're working with, and you can do the same yourself depending on your own business needs. So I'll now talk you through a little bit about what makes a good framework. So at its core, a good prioritization framework aims to consider both the impact and the effort. So I'll be getting on in a moment to talk about this in a bit more detail, but essentially the impact is the uplift you expect to see with a test. Do we have data to inform us that we think this is going to have a positive impact on the KPI that we're trying to shift? And then the effort is, how long is this going to take to build? Is this going to cause a bit of politics in the business? Is sign-off going to be difficult? So we need to consider both of those things before we start working on a test. And then really we want to use a binary scale where possible. The reason for this is it's a great way of trying to score things in an objective way and eliminate any bias that might exist. And then the third is one that helps to foster a more data-informed culture. So we want to be data-informed, so then we're not testing just what we think we should test. We're testing what we know the data is telling us to test. So this is the components of a framework that I'll take you through in a bit more detail. So first of all, let's look at impact. So here we've got 6 or 7 different components, and I'll talk you through very briefly through each one. So quantitative data. Does any quantitative data exist? Does any, do you have any insights to show that this is a valid test? So this could be from web analytics, for example. It could be from heat mapping. that shows, yep, there is an issue here. Give it a score. Qualitative data, maybe you've done some user research, some interviews that are showing that there's an issue. Give it a 1 if there is, 0 if you don't have any of that data. Previous tests. Have you done any previous testing here that shows you should test here again? Psychological principles. Are there cognitive biases or persuasion principles that you can use here in this test? If there are, that's probably a good thing. Give it a score. Is the change visible under 5 seconds? We know that really what we're trying to do here is impact user behavior. So if it's a test that the user can see straight away, we know that's probably more likely going to have an impact on user behavior. Goal alignment, is this aligning with your business goals? And then the final 2 here are area and KPI value. So these, as you can see, aren't binary. And this is based on area value. Is it an area such as the homepage, for example, where you get lots of traffic versus a page where you don't get as much traffic? And KPI value, are you trying to shift a KPI that's relevant to what your business goals and your main aims? And then we have our effort. So that's really test build. Is it difficult for the developers to build? Will it be difficult to implement? And will it be difficult for you to get sign off? So you're ranking those there. And at the end, you'll get a final rank score. So what we've done there, as we talk about what makes a good framework, we've considered both our impact and our effort of the test. We've tried to use a binary scale where possible to make it as objective as possible. And then we've helped foster a more data-informed culture. So all of these tests here have been informed by data that we know exists. So we're ranking our tests based on insights rather than just what we want to test. And what you'll end up with, once you do that with all of your tests, is a long list that will look something a bit like this, where you'll have your test numbers over here on the left-hand side, and essentially your rank here in the middle that will give you your prioritized test order. So that is a top-level overview of how to run that. I will now be handing over to Osh, who will talk you through creating a business case.
Great stuff. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I mean, I think, really sort of summing up what Nick and Alex have taken us through so far, there's 2 kind of golden truths really that that we always kind of keep front of mind, which is, your analytics data tells you what customers are doing, but doesn't tell you why they're doing it. And I think the other thing that's really important is that just because your competitors are doing something, it doesn't mean that it's working. So, those are 2 kind of truths to always keep kind of front of mind. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Liz Brown, who heads up all things e-commerce over at RSPB, and we're going to take you through a little bit about what their core objectives were and how we managed to realize those through DxO. When the slide changes.
Hello. Hi everybody. Thanks, Osh. I'd like to start by giving you an introduction to the RSPB. So the Society for the Protection of Birds began in 1889, so we've been around for quite some time now. The RSPB is a UK-based nature conservation charity, and we're all about collaborating to create a world richer in nature. So we're far broader than just birds, and we take action to protect all species across the UK and actually have international partnerships too. But we look to restore special places that are inspire and enable everyone to act to protect nature, which has been really an important part of all of our lives, I think, over the last year with COVID impacts. So as of 2020, we had over 1 million members, making us one of the largest wildlife conservation organisations in the world. We have a very loyal membership base with 60% of our members being members for over 5 years. We also have 1.5 million non-member active supporters. A lot of our members and supporters visit our nature reserves across the UK. We have more than 200 of these, and it covers an area of 150,000 hectares, which is home to 80% of most of threatened bird species in the UK. And we have 2.5 million visitors coming to our reserves every year. We're a fairly large organisation with 2,000 staff, but we have a very strong volunteer base, which is great for us, of more than 17,000 people. So to give you a bit of background into my specific area, I head up the e-commerce team and the online RSPB shop. We have around 1,500 products online, so this ranges from bird food, bird care, wildlife products, but also educational books, gift products, home products, and we have quite a large range at Christmas time. We're a very important income stream for the RSPB, and we have over the last year been more important with our physical shops on reserves having to shut during COVID impacts. So to give you a bit of background, in 2018 we re-platformed our website and moved to a new platform into shop, and we took the approach of a minimal viable product. So we knew when we moved to the new website that we needed to further develop our offering. But like a lot of us, we had limited resources on how we could develop the site. So the challenge for us was where can we improve our site? Where should we really focus to deliver the results? And how can we build a business case for the RSPB, the wider RSP, to invest in increasing investment in e-commerce itself? So that's where we were really looking at the need for digital experience optimization. So our objectives really is the same then as it is now, to increase pace and scale of e-commerce income growth. I wanted to develop a framework to develop our website based on data and research driven insights and testing. A lot of the areas that you've been hearing this morning from the other Daydot colleagues, and really accelerate growth beyond our own internal capabilities. We're a very small team and limited resources. So to deliver any step change in growth, we needed to look at how we could achieve this. And so I started to explore proof of concept of what DXO could really drive for us in terms of delivering sustainable incremental growth. But really for us, it's all about delivering a positive return on investment. So I'll just hand back to Osh, who's going to run through proving the value of DXO.
Great, thanks, Liz. So really kind of sort of going over where Nick and Alex left us off, which is really, we started the process off by uncovering those kind of insights and customer truths that help to identify the problems around conversion, around usability of the site. We started to prioritize those using the prioritization framework that Alex mentioned. So what I think we had over 71 different testing ideas, and it's about arranging those by the complexity, the ability to implement, but more importantly, the expected revenue growth that would come from each of those tests. And from that prioritized list, we looked at one or two key experiments that would help us to give us some benchmarks about what's viable for e-commerce shop and testing across that flow, and start to give us a basis for building a business case. So the first test we looked at is with the product page. So again, looking at the prioritization, we looked at where the problems were with product page, but also the volume of traffic that was going through there. Product pages are typically key to driving more traffic flow and intent traffic throw into your cart. We started by improving visibility, improving the improving stuff like the sort of motivation. There's a lot more product information. There's also the sort of value proposition, and making sure that everything's above the fold. It sounds very simple, but trying to get everything, all of those kind of points done in one go is kind of where the magic comes from. And by making those changes, which again were really kind of driven by the research insights that we had and the data that we'd seen, we managed to see a 5.38% increase in shop conversion rates, which is worth over £500,000 a year in incremental revenue to RSPB shop. The second piece was quite an interesting one. I mean, this was really sort of last year during the first lockdown. A lot of businesses were struggling with supply chain management, trying to get products and keep things in stock. So as that was a real challenge, we didn't necessarily want to encourage users to buy more stock, which was potentially out of stock. So we looked at other ways that we could start to grow income for the RSPB, and one of those ways was looking at the donation lightbox. So when you look to purchase something, they ask, would you like this as a one-off donation? We ran quite a lot of research around the customer, around motivation, about anxieties around that, and started to make some changes to the donation lightbox, which comes up within the cart, adding more emotive language, simplifying the choice architecture, and aligning some of the outcomes of that each of those donation values to something which the RSPB will actually be working on. And as a result of that, we saw a 73% increase in donation conversion value without that impacting the overall e-commerce conversion value, which was great. And in the first 12 months, we expect that to be worth almost £100,000 in incremental income for the charity. So we talk about building a business case, and this is super important. I mean, for a lot of businesses, when you look at, you call it CRO, you call it testing, you call it DXO, typically the challenge is getting buy-in from the wider business and gaining investment. A lot of the time, the metric we use for gaining additional investment is expected CPA. What about when there isn't an expected CPA off the back of something? How do we then look to gain trust and investment from the business for that? So we start off with data and research driven experiments. So this is what we did with RSPB. This gives you some results to then start to work on. It gives you effectively benchmarks. Is what can we expect each test to deliver within a range? So with each experiment, we can expect X% uplift in conversion rate. We can expect Y percentage of tests to be green, i.e., to be measurably valuable. You can then start to build a business case around that. So that, okay, well, we have these 71 ideas. We've managed to wrap them up, prioritize them. So here are our top 12. You start to build a roadmap of those top 12 experiments. What you think the expected value is based on the amount of traffic that's coming through, the expected uplift per test, which you've got from your benchmarks, from your benchmark experiments and proof of concepts, and then you start to build out what that sustainable revenue flow and incremental revenue flow looks like over the next 12, 18, 24 months. And that helps to build a more substantial business case rather than, well, we need this budget to do a load of testing. It starts to become, we need this budget to generate this amount of incremental revenue for the business over the next 18 months. It's super important to start using the same language as the rest of the business. So your leadership team, your finance people, they speak in a very different way to marketeers. So it's important to start to help them better understand what the levers for growth are. So, going into the weeds on the specifics of your experimentation and marketing, that's not really going to work, but giving them a very clear and robust model for what that uplift looks like, how that's going to be produced, and what are the levers for impacting that alongside the expected return, that's going to be really, really important. And finally, starting to understand the wider impact for the business. What are the incremental gains that your business is going to see off the back of an experimentation program like this? So this could be anything from better audience understanding, commonality of comms and messaging across all your channels, both acquisition, engagement, onboarding, and retention. Building an experimental culture. So, we've got these frameworks, we've got these methodologies and approaches to doing something. You can start to see the benefit of that within organizations, of everyone understands the most effective way of doing things. So rather than gut feel and data led, it's data and insights led, and this is how we start to populate and flow through that experimentation process. And lastly, just really, really great and better understanding of your actual customers, starting to flesh out some of those personas that you have that aren't really very actionable. Great. So I'm passing over to Liz, who's going to talk through some of the learnings that her organisation has really felt from the impact of this work.
Yeah, so this really builds on what Osh has just been saying. So how has DXO impacted our shop business? So really, from the 2 tests that Osh ran through, that alone will increase income by 1.8 million revenue, incremental revenue over the next 3 years. So we're already seeing the benefit of those uplifts over the last year, where e-commerce has been really valuable and important for the RSPB as the wider organisation. So the impact it's had on the wider organisation is really that it has had a cultural shift for us to present and approach development more in an experimentational-led way, looking at testing and data-driven research. It's raised the profile of e-commerce across the organisation as well. And as Osh said, it's really important to bring the stakeholders along with you in terms of sharing those results and sharing what the impacts can have. And as a result of these initial tests, we've worked collaboratively with Daydot to develop a roadmap, going through an ideation session, as Alex ran through, and gained agreement for an always-on testing approach, and also to look at some special larger scale projects alongside that. An example is around our navigation area, where we need to actually do more user research. It's a bigger project. So as a result of working together, I've been able to triple investment in DXO, which is a great result, and we're starting on that journey this year, really. So my feedback in terms of advice for everyone on the webinar, really from my experience, is that really start small, look for some quick wins, look for where the biggest impacts can be for your organisation, and work together to identify a proof of concept approach to actually show what you could deliver if given some investment, and then from there work through all of the areas based on research and insight where you can actually make a step change with your digital offerings. So I hope that's helped. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Liz. We've got some questions that that you guys have been asking. It'd be great to go through those. And what we'll do is, first of all, let's look at the poll results. I know you've all been very excited about this. So overall, we asked you what's your core objective for this year, and an overwhelming 50% of you talked about engagement and retention being a real core objective, and that's really interesting. I mean, that's something that we're seeing more and more, which is it's not our businesses are changing not just from acquisition, but through to really looking to grow recurring revenues and increase customer lifetime value. So it's not surprising that that engagement and retention piece is definitely the winner there. I think then what would be great is start off with some of the questions that we have from you guys. So I think the first one is around the not all tests are going to produce positive outcomes, and how can we look to minimize this risk? And that's a great question. I think that kind of really feeds into both Nick and Alex's presentations, which is around using your research to enrich your existing data and provide actionable insights, and then look to further qualify those into and translate those into actual tests using the frameworks and the approach that Alex is running through. And what that looks to do is to de-risk experimentation. Is if you have a very solid problem that's been identified through research and then almost kind of triangulated through data, you've gone through that process with Alex, and you're looking at each test that you run is more successful than both in terms of getting measurable results, but also in terms of growth, than just using gut feel or simply saying, you've seen something on GA and think, yeah, let's look to fix that. It's just a more effective and less risky way of going about sort of testing and experimentation. There's a good one. Sorry,
just a very brief addition to that is that clearly you want to be running tests that do result in things like an uplift in sales, but equally don't be afraid, don't be worried if there are some tests that aren't successful, because you still learn from those. And so successful is in inverted commas. The question is, do you learn useful things from a test? So even if a test doesn't confirm your hypothesis, then you find it doesn't achieve the results that you'd expected, it leads, there's the feedback loop there saying, oh, we thought this was going to do such and such, let's figure out why. And you might get some really useful learnings just out of what you would otherwise call a red test.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that one, Nick. So I've got one for Liz, which is how long did it take you to scale the shop to where it is now?
Yeah, I think we had quite an impact before we re-platformed with the impact of GDPR. So we actually lost half of our contact customer base, and we lost quite a lot of traffic re-platforming and because of GDPR impact. So I think it's taken us the time from when we re-platformed actually. So where are we? 2 years. There's a lot to do.
Yeah.
Still.
No pressure, huh? So here's one for Nick, I think, which is there are so many qualitative research methods out there. How do I know which one to use and which one's right for your business?
It's a great question, actually, and unfortunately not one that you can answer really quickly. As with so many things, the answer is it depends. There are a number of dimensions that you need to think about when you're doing any sort of research, and you start off with, what question do I want to answer? That is the first thing. And often when somebody's asking me to do some research and I'll go back to them, that question in itself will encourage quite a bit of debate, getting real clarity on the core questions and why people want an answer to that question and what they're going to do with the information. And there's also part of the equation is, can you get hold of the target audience for those questions? Maybe you're doing some research on frequent customers or frequent donors, or maybe you're trying to attract people who aren't currently your customers. And so there's always a question as to whether you can get hold of the right people. And then there are things that you would factor in that would include timescales. How long have you got to do the research? How much budget have you got to put into it? These are all various considerations. So it's a complicated equation. I did, in fact, write an article a short while ago that might help to give a little bit of insight into this. And I think maybe if Susie could just drop the link to that article into the chat, that might help if you're interested in that.
Great, thanks, Nick. There's a couple of very similar ones here, which is around how do you balance the priority of DxO budgets against other digital marketing budgets, for example, PPC, display, advertising. And I think also what are the kind of common objections when trying to develop a solid business case. So really what you need to do particularly for stakeholders within your business that don't have a solid understanding of what DxO is, what the value of optimization, or really kind of the nuts and bolts of your kind of acquisition machine, is start to tie specific benchmarks to stuff like your conversion rate, your AOV, your click-through rate. Is what are the metrics that can be amplified and enriched by DxO? So, for example, an investment in increasing your conversion rate by, let's say, 5% per test, right? As a benchmark. Let's say you've got that as your benchmark from your proof of concept. You then have a fair idea that we have a test win rate of X. We've got our expected uplift in conversion rate. What is then the knock-on effect of that? So your earnings per click improves. Your media is more efficient, and you can start to qualify that out on your own end. So we know that an investment in DxO provides X amount of incremental revenue over the next 12 months, but also it's creating these efficiencies. So our brand search is going to be more efficient. Our display advertising is more effective because we're taking on board a lot of those relevancies and commonalities that we found from the research insights and start to overlay that across the entire journey. So trying to attach those numbers to specific increases. So I've just created a dashboard for a client this week, actually, which is their C-suite and their finance department are asking the similar sort of questions. And okay, well, let's look at, this is our conversion rate now. This is our renewal rate. This is our AOV, and this is our CPA. What are things that we're going to be doing over the next 18 to 24 months that are going to be impacting each of those, and what is how are those levers impacted? With this budget, we expect to see this, and these are where they're going to be those impacts are going to be felt. With this budget, we're going to see this, and it's often really useful to give scenarios. So scenario one, we have this amount of budget, and this is what these are the expected outcomes. Outside of purely revenue, let's look at those efficiencies that that's driving as well, and that's typically the most effective way of presenting a really solid and compelling business case.
Yeah, I just
Great
want to
stuff.
add to what Osh was saying, because Owen's put a question there about what are the common objections. I think the way we approached it was, as Osh was saying, create different scenarios. So you have different, best case, worst case sort of rationales. So then you can have discussions around which one you want to choose in terms of minimizing the risk. I mean, it is all basically all around risk, isn't it? In terms of, and good results, obviously, but from the finance guy's point of view, it's all around cost and resources. So what are we getting back? What's our return on investment? And that's how we approached it, is doing scenarios and then having discussions with key stakeholders around that.
Perfect, thanks, Liz. So one for Alex, I think, is we talked about that kind of de-risking of experimentation and making sure that the tests that you're running are going to be as valuable as possible, even if they're a losing test, so to speak. What are some of the things that you can do to start to increase the probability of a test winning?
I think really is research. Research is the absolute key to any decent test strategy. I'm always hesitant to move forward without research, because really research is the strategy. So the more research you can do and the better you can understand the customer problems on your site, the better the chances are you will probably get a test winner. On top of that, I think it's bringing together the relevant people. So you may have a load of really decent insights, but you will need the advice from a designer and a developer and anyone else in your company to help create a good idea that's actually going to resonate with users. So the key is to be collaborative, bring people in. It can't all be done by one person. So I think they're probably the two key things that I would recommend. Great, perfect. Thank you very much. Right, well, I think that pretty much wraps up today. Thank you all for coming along, and thank you for our panelists. It's been really really exciting. The results of the survey will be emailed to you, and if you have any questions after then, please get in touch. That's my email there. We'd love to hear from you, especially if you have any more questions around some of the stuff that we've presented today. Great. Thank you very much, and have a great day.